Meet Paula. She is pretty much me, and in order to make her me, I needed to create some padding around the waist a while back. Now, Paula over here recently got a friend named Ola, and Ola is a very petite lady. Due to a very important project I'm currently working on, my sister's wedding dress, we need to add some body to this dress form. Ola is a very slender person, but nevertheless, we need a more precise shape in order to help match Ola's as close as possible so that sewing a wedding dress will be as smooth as possible because Ola doesn't live here. She's somewhere on the other side of the country. So I'm gonna create my own version of a sister without a head. So my approach is to pretty much recreate all of the panels in a dress form. Well, from rib cage down. Took me 2 days, but the result is pretty much a second layer of skin in a dress form, which we can take off, put on, or even easily adjust if needed, especially because brides do tend to lose weight before the big day. This will also work well in many body shapes and sizes so long as the calculations are correct. I'm using cotton canvas as the outer layer of fabric. They're carefully draping a piece of fabric over each section on the dress form. We need to trace only one side because the other is a complete reflection. I'm starting off by working on the top section first. Make sure that the center front and center back panels are cut on straight of grain, then fold the edge about 1 inch and press, and then align that edge along the center front of the dress form and the center back. The fabric is completely smoothed over the appropriate area, pinned along the seam lines, and everywhere else really to hold its shape. And pin in the direction you're smoothing and pulling the fabric. Once satisfied, carefully mark along the seam line, top ribcage area, the 2 vertical sides and waistline. I then went back and carefully using a ruler for precision traced over the markings, added 1 inch of seam allowance just in case, and cut it all out. After all the top panels were traced and recreated, I moved on to the bottom. Now using Swedish transfer paper, we want to create paper pattern. Make sure that the stitch line where the top and the bottom is attached is exactly the same. Also, the adjacent vertical stitch lines match. Make adjustments if needed and move on. In some instances, it might actually be easier to start working with the pattern layer and then move your way out onto the shell layer. This way you don't have to suffer with calculations and figuring out how much room and where to add width on the outer shell fabric. I imagine smart people take this approach, but with my sister, she's shaped very similarly to the dress form, so it's just a matter of adding width to each panels uniformly around the entire dress form. So now that I have exact panel shapes on paper, we need to account for the width increase on all the panels when transferring the pattern onto cotton canvas. There are 8 panels, and if I add 1/8 of an inch on each side of the panel, only along the waistline and down the entire bottom panels, this will equal to exactly a 2-inch increase. Increasing the width equally among the panels made sense in my case, and it all depends on the body type and where the curves are. Now we want to stitch the top panels together, all of them but the center back, because how else am I going to wrap this around, Ola? So we start by attaching the center front panels and move our way out for both the top and the bottom. I'm one of those people who can't work with pins for the most part. Well, for the top it kind of works because the lines are straight, but for the bottom curvier lines, I have to go in and just hand baste with thread. The sewing machine stitch line is like all over the place. So here are the top and bottom outer layers. Everything seems to match, thankfully. The seam's width is reduced to decrease bulk, and the top and bottom is connected along the waistline, making sure that all the seam lines match exactly on point. It needs to be beautiful. On to layer 2, which is an exact repetition of layer 1. But I'm using softer cotton flannel fabric instead because flannel sticks to the dress form. It also feels like the flannel will replicate the natural squish factor of a human body. I'm planning to increase the fluffiness of the fabric as I move further away from the outer shell layer. Flannel layer is then attached to canvas layer along the top seam lines. Pressed, flipped inside out and pressed again. Also, don't forget to clip the seams in a staggered formation along the curvy areas, such as like bosom if needed or the booty. So I believe at this point the waist and hips were already increased by about an inch, which is amazing. It doesn't really take all that much. The bottom folded crease will then indicate where exactly to stitch the canvas to the cotton layer. And now we pretty much have a bodycon dress for the dress form that is clean inside and out. This will serve as the base outer layer for further padding. They can be adjusted if needed and maybe even used to drape on multiple people. So I'm using cotton batting as the removable inside layer. Trace and cut the pattern piece in a sheet of folded batting. Don't forget to increase the width where needed and add about ½ inch of seam allowance on this layer. Regarding attaching the seam lines together, I approached the step differently in order to reduce bulk by overlapping the two panels by ½ inch and then sewing 2 rows of stitches to hold the panels in place. Seam lines is then offset, meaning it doesn't align with the stitch line of the outer layer, so it distributes the thickness that the seam lines create throughout. So here I'm using pins to indicate where ½ inch is, pinning, and then stitching 2 rows to hold in place. The top and skirt are all ready to be attached to the waistline exactly the same way the panels were attached by overlapping the 2 rows of stitches. Onto the final 4th layer, repeating the previous cotton batting layer but adjusting where the seam lines are overlapping to further offset the seams. And I've created 4 panels on the top rather than 8. We need to attach the batting layer to the outer layer, preferably at various locations and along the seam line, so that the layers do not shift while handling. The layers need to be graded at the top around the rib cage and the bottom because grading layers prevent harsh lines, meaning the increase of the padding is happening gradually and naturally. After a quick test run, it turned out that the 2 layers of cotton batting on the top is too much. It created an extra inch of width around the waistline. So we're cutting that portion off and saving it for some other project. And here it is, 1 layer of batting on top and 2 below. All layers are attached and ready to be stretched and pulled and fitted onto the dress form. Just using simple pins, preferably with tiny metal heads. So it's just stretching and pulling, then pinning and repinning, making sure that all the seam lines align and everything is smooth as possible. The back center seam is folded back as needed, pinned, and in my case should be one of the last steps. Now let's attach the twill tape just like on the original for a finishing touch. We want to look professional. We can also increase the chest size if needed. I thought I would initially, turns out no. Fine with current size, but let's make a cup regardless and see how it'll turn out, since I've never draped or sewn cups before. And once the draping is complete, I will perfect the curvature of the lines, measure to make sure that all the pieces fit when sewn together, and transfer pattern onto paper. Carefully cut it all out, and it's ready to be assembled. Well, not so fast. So it turns out with the cups I needed to start working with the batting layer first. It does not want to fit properly due to all the thickness, so I flipped the cup, placed it onto the opposite side, and draped over the batting layer and then stitched it all by hand.